I'm sitting at my kitchen table with a music box in my hands that I almost lost forever, and I keep thinking about how close I came to letting it go without a fight. It's small. Pale blue enamel over copper with a little chip on the bottom left corner from when my husband dropped it the day we bought it at that antique shop in Vermont. 1987, the summer before our son was born. George picked it up, turned it over in his hands and said, "Ruthann, this is the kind of thing you pass down." I said it was too expensive. He bought it anyway. When you wind the key and lift the lid, it plays Clair de Lune. Slowly, a little unevenly now, because the mechanism is old. But it still plays. George died 4 years ago this past March. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We had 34 years together, and then we had 11 weeks of watching him disappear. And then I had the music box, and a house that still smelled like him, and a son who lived 40 minutes away and called every Sunday. My son's name is Warren. He's 31. He looks exactly like his father around the eyes, which I find both wonderful and unbearable depending on the day. He started dating his girlfriend. I'm going to call her his girlfriend, because even now I struggle to use the word wife in connection with what I need to tell you. About 2 years after George passed. Her name is Crystal, spelled with a K. She's 28. She works in something called brand consulting, which as far as I can tell, means she tells small businesses to change their logo for $15,000. She is very thin and very polished, and the first time she came to Sunday dinner, she looked around my living room at all my things, and I watched her take a breath through her nose the way you do when you're trying to be polite about a smell. I told myself I was imagining it. I'm a retired high school English teacher. I live in Concord, New Hampshire. I have a vegetable garden in the summer, I read 2 books a week, and I have been alone in this house for 4 years, learning what alone actually means. Warren is all I have left of George that moves and breathes, and I was not willing to lose him. So when Crystal came into his life, I made myself patient. I smiled at dinners. I asked questions about her work. I told myself that what mattered was that Warren was happy. And he was happy. He really was. Whatever she gave him, some energy, some forward momentum, some feeling of being chosen by someone impressive, it lit him up. I could see it. So I swallowed a lot of things. I kept smiling. He proposed last April. She said yes. I found out in a phone call on a Tuesday, Warren's voice bright and a little nervous, asking me if I was happy for him. I was. I am. I told him so, and I meant it. What I didn't know, at the time of that phone call, was what was inside the music box. After George died, I went through his office in the weeks when I couldn't sleep anyway. The drawer of his desk held the things he'd been meaning to deal with. Papers, mostly, things that seemed important but not urgent. Among them I found an envelope with Warren's name on it in George's handwriting. Inside was a letter, 4 pages, handwritten on yellow legal paper, and tucked into the fold of the letter were 2 things, a key to a safe deposit box at our bank, and a note that said the box held a certificate for $40,000 in U.S. savings bonds, purchased in Warren's name over 20 years, a few $100s at a time, every birthday and Christmas, quietly, without ever mentioning it to me, or Warren, or anyone. George, who grew up poor in a mill town in western Massachusetts and spent his entire adult life making sure his family would be okay, had been building a gift for our son for 20 years without making a single announcement about it. The letter was, I'm not going to tell you everything in it, because some of it is only for Warren. But it talked about what George hoped for Warren's life. His marriage, someday. His children, maybe. What it meant to him to be a father. There were things in that letter I hadn't heard George say out loud in 34 years, and reading it alone in his office, at 2 a.m, I just sat on the floor and held it, and cried for a long time. I didn't tell Warren about the letter or the bonds right away. It wasn't a conscious decision not to. I was grieving. I was barely managing the weeks, and then time passed the way it does, and Warren seemed to be getting along. And I told myself I would find the right moment. I found the right moment when he got engaged. I thought about what to do for a long time. I knew I wanted to give him the letter and the bonds, but I wanted to give it in a way that felt worthy of what George had done. The patience of it, the privacy of it, The 20-year quietness of it. George hadn't put it in a bank folder. He'd kept it tucked in an envelope in his drawer, personal and deliberate. And I remembered the music box. I'd had it relined the year before, because the old velvet was going. A small repair shop near me does antique restoration, and when the owner, an older man named Bernard, who I've known for years, brought it back to me, I noticed the lining had a small pocket sewn into the lid. I asked him about it. He said all boxes of that style had them, a jewelry pocket originally. I thought, the letter and the key fit exactly, so I folded George's letter carefully. I put the key in with it. I tucked them into the pocket in the lid of the music box, underneath the velvet flap so they weren't visible when you opened it. You'd have to know to look. I wound the key, lifted the lid, and Claire de Lune played the way it always had. And I thought, when Warren opens this at the engagement party and the music plays, I'll tell him to look in the lid. And when he finds the key and the letter, the whole room will understand that his father, who couldn't be there, had been thinking about this day for 20 years. I want you to understand how carefully I thought about this. It wasn't just a gift. It was the last conversation George would ever get to have with his son, and I was trying to make it happen in the right room, at the right moment, in a way that would stay with Warren for the rest of his life. I wrapped it in plain cream tissue paper and put it in a gift bag. Nothing elaborate on the outside, because the inside was everything. The engagement party was on a Saturday evening in early October. Crystal's parents hosted it at their home in Bedford, a large, very new house, the kind where every surface is white or gray and there are no books visible anywhere. I drove myself, the gift bag on the passenger seat where George used to sit, and I talked to him a little, on the way I do sometimes, just quietly, just telling him what was happening. I was nervous, not socially nervous. I'm 63 years old. I've survived a lot of rooms. But the kind of nervous you feel when something matters enormously and you have no control over how it's received. There were about 30 people there. Crystal's friends, some of Warren's, her parents, a few of his colleagues, her mother, who I'll call Deb because that is her name, and I feel she has earned being named, had organized everything with the kind of precision that suggests this was, for her, something close to a competitive sport. The flowers were elaborate. There was a charcuterie set up that seemed to have a theme. The house smelled like a Williams-Sonoma. I am not against nice things. I want to be clear about that. I just live differently, and I have never thought that made me less. I arrived and found Warren immediately and hugged him, and he held on a little longer than usual, the way he sometimes does when he's feeling something he can't say. And I thought, George, you should see him. You'd be so proud. The gifts were being set on a table near the back of the room. I added mine and said hello to people and had a glass of wine and watched my son move through the party, and I let myself feel something close to okay. The gift opening happened after dinner. Everyone gathered in the living room. Warren and Crystal sat together on the love seat. They were doing it together, both of them, working through the pile. Most of the gifts were things from a registry. Nice things, practical things. A stand mixer in a color Crystal had selected. My bag was near the end. Crystal reached for it, and I leaned forward a little, and I thought, here. She pulled the tissue paper out. The music box was nestled inside, the pale blue catching the light. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, that's sweet," in a tone I recognized from 25 years of students who didn't want to be honest about an assignment, and she put it on the cushion beside her, and she moved to the next gift. She didn't open it. She didn't wind the key. She didn't let the music play. I sat very still. Warren was opening something else. Someone laughed at something across the room. Crystal's mother came over and took the music box from the cushion, and I thought she was going to look at it, examine it, ask about it, and instead, she walked it to the gift table in the corner and set it down, but she set it down too close to the edge, and I watched it tip sideways and start to slide. And then Crystal said, without looking up from the next gift, "Oh, just put that in the donate pile. We're not really doing the antique thing in the apartment." Her mother looked at the box, then she looked at me. And for 1 second, I saw something move across her face that might have been discomfort Or might have been the recognition that her daughter had just said something that could not be unsaid. But she picked up the music box and she put it in a brown box in the corner that had a sticky note on it that said, Goodwill. I sat there for a moment, one moment. Then I stood up and I walked to the corner and I took the music box out of the box. I didn't say anything. I held it under my arm and I walked back to my seat and I sat down and I watched the rest of the gift opening. No one said anything to me. The party continued. I had another half glass of wine. I said goodbye to Warren at the end of the evening, and he hugged me and said, "Thank you for coming, Mom." And I said, "Of course, sweetheart. Congratulations." And I drove home with the music box on the passenger seat, and this time I didn't talk. I put the box on my dresser when I got home. I looked at it for a while. Then I went to bed. I want to tell you something about that night before I tell you what happened next. I was not performing dignity. I was not thinking about lessons or consequences or justice. I was just a woman who had driven 40 minutes to watch her late husband's most private gift get put in a box for Goodwill, and I was too tired and too sad to do anything other than go to sleep. I did not cry until about 3 in the morning, and then I cried for quite a while. On Sunday, Warren called at his usual time. His voice was normal, a little post-party tired, but normal. We talked about the food and the people, and how his colleague's new baby was getting so big. I did not bring up the music box. Neither did he. I thought maybe he hadn't noticed. I thought maybe that was how it was going to be. And then, on Monday evening, my phone rang. It was Warren. Not his Sunday call, a separate call on a Monday, which he almost never does. His voice was different. "Mom," he said, and then there was a pause that told me something had shifted. "Mom, I was looking at everything from Saturday, going through the stuff, and I couldn't find your gift." I didn't answer right away. Did we set it aside somewhere? I remembered you brought something in a cream bag. I looked through everything, and it's not here. "Warren," I said. "Yeah, it's here. I have it." Another pause. Why do you have it?" And something in his voice, not suspicion, not accusation, but something quieter, something a little uncertain, told me he already knew. Somewhere in the 40 minutes between, when I'd stood up and taken the box, and when I'd left the party, he had seen something, or someone had told him something, or he'd put together something, and he was calling me on a Monday evening, because he needed to understand what had happened. "Crystal said to put it in the donation box," I said, "so I took it home." The silence on the phone was the longest silence I have ever heard from my son. He was 31 years old, and I could hear him at 8, at 12, at 17, in that silence. The way he goes quiet when something lands on him that he doesn't know how to hold yet. "Mom," he said finally, "what's in it?" "What do you mean?" "The music box. There's something in the lid, isn't there?" I picked it up once when I was there for dinner a few months ago, and something shifted inside it, like there was something in the lining, and I didn't ask because I thought maybe it was just, I don't know. But there is something in it. I sat down on the edge of my bed. "Yes," I said. "What is it?" And here is where I had to make a decision in real time, in the space about 3 seconds, about how much to say on the phone versus in person, and what Warren was actually ready to receive, and what George would have wanted. "It's a letter," I said, "from your father." The breath he took, I'm going to remember that breath for the rest of my life. It wasn't a gasp, it was slower than that, like something in his chest had unlocked. "I didn't know he'd left one," Warren said. I looked. After he died, I looked everywhere and I didn't find anything. "I found it in his desk," I said. "About 6 weeks after. I was going to wait for the right time. Mom, is there anything else in there?" "Yes." I told him about the savings bonds. All of it, the 20-year plan, the safe deposit box key, the amount. I heard him go very, very quiet on the other end. "He never told me," Warren said. "No, he never told anyone, not even me. I found the envelope the same night I found the letter." Warren was quiet again for a long time. And then, "I don't even care about the money, Mom. I mean, I care. Dad did that for 20 years? Your father," I said, "was the most patient man I ever knew. We talked for a long time after that, about George, about the music box and what it meant and why I'd hidden the letter inside it, about what it might have been like if things at the party had gone differently, if Crystal had opened it, if the music had played, if the room had known. About what didn't happen. I told him I was glad I'd taken it back. I told him I wasn't angry, which was mostly true. I told him I just wanted him to have what his father left him, and that I'd been trying to give it to him the right way, and that the right way hadn't been possible on Saturday. He asked me if he could come over. He came the next evening. He sat at this kitchen table, the same table I'm sitting at right now, and I brought out the music box and set it between us and wound the key and lifted the lid. Claire de Lune played, slow and a little uneven, the way it always does. He held it for a long time. Then I showed him the pocket in the lid, and he lifted the velvet flap, and he took out the envelope, and he sat there at my kitchen table and read his father's letter. I made tea. I stayed nearby, but I gave him the room to be alone in it, the way you do. I heard him cry quietly at one point, and then heard him stop, and then I heard him turn the pages. When he was finished, he sat for a while, with the letter folded in his hands. He wrote about the house I'd have someday, Warren said. He described things. He wrote about what he hoped I'd understand by the time I was old enough to really get it. He said he knew he wouldn't be around for all of it, and he wanted to make sure I heard him anyway. I nodded. He said to take care of you, Warren said, and looked at me. He said that specifically. He said, take care of your mother. She'll say she's fine, but check anyway. We talked about the savings bonds and what to do with them. I still had the key. I'd already spoken with the bank, and the bonds were intact, waiting. Warren wanted to put them toward a down payment on a house. Something solid, something George would have appreciated. He said he was going to think about it carefully, take his time, the way his father would have. I did not give him the key that night. I told him I wanted to hold it a little longer, that I needed a little more time to feel like I'd honored what George had built. He said he understood. He took the music box with him when he left. Before he left, he stood at the back door for a moment, and he said, I'm sorry, Mom, about Saturday. I told him he didn't have to apologize for someone else's behavior. He said, I know. I'm just sorry. I've thought about what to do with everything. The bonds, the relationship, the version of the future I thought I was building when I wrapped that music box in cream tissue paper. I don't have perfect answers. Warren and Crystal are still engaged. I have not been told whether any conversation happened between them after Monday, and I have not asked, because it's not my conversation to know. What I know is this. George spent 20 years building something for his son, quietly and without announcement, because that was how he loved, practically, patiently, in the background. He didn't build it so it could end up in a Goodwill box. He built it so that someday, in some room, Warren would feel the full weight of being his son. That happened at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in October, 2 days later than planned, without the 30 guests and the charcuterie and the elaborate flowers. Just Warren and me and Claire de Lune playing slowly in the quiet, and a letter from a man who had known, somehow, that his son would need to hear from him long after he was gone. The music box is back on my dresser now. I keep winding it some evenings just to hear it play. I don't think George would mind.